He was calm, polite, and walked into the store he owned. But what happened next? A manager screamed at him, called security, and humiliated him in front of everyone because of the color of his skin. What the manager didn't know was that the man he just kicked out had the power to change everything the next day. If stories like this make your heart race and your soul burn for justice, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because on this channel, we tell the truth they try to silence. Malcolm Carter had never been one for the limelight. He wasn't one of those entrepreneurs who flaunted his wealth or posted extravagant pictures on social media. His life was about quiet ambition, hard work, and a deep commitment to his community. At 38, Malcolm had already achieved what many would consider the American dream, a small chain of successful home supply stores scattered across the state. Each of his stores represented years of sacrifice, hours spent working in the trenches, and a quiet desire to uplift others along the way. Carter & Kober Home Supplies, the latest addition to his growing empire, was just 2 weeks old. He had purchased the business with the intent to revitalize it, make it a place of pride not only for himself, but for the neighborhood he cared about. But there was one thing Malcolm hadn't done yet: introduce himself to the staff. He wanted to do it in a way that felt real, without fanfare or speeches. So, on a seemingly normal Tuesday morning, Malcolm, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, walked into his new store. As he strolled through the aisles, inspecting the shelves, chatting briefly with a few employees, he noticed something strange. The store was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The manager, a man named Rick Daniels, didn't seem to acknowledge his presence. That wasn't what bothered Malcolm, though. What really made him pause was the way Rick was glaring at him. It was subtle at first, just a hard, dismissive stare from behind the counter, but it soon escalated. Rick marched toward Malcolm with a frown etched across his face. "What do you think you're doing here?" he demanded, his tone sharp and aggressive. Malcolm, not wanting to cause a scene, simply responded, "I'm just checking out the store." Rick wasn't having it. He scowled, his voice rising. "This isn't a hangout spot for you, man. Customers only. Get out, or I'll call the cops." The nerve in Rick's voice suggested he had been dealing with troublemakers before. But Malcolm, ever composed, simply raised an eyebrow. He wasn't offended, just confused. "I'm actually the owner of this store," he said, his voice calm and steady. Rick let out a sarcastic laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, and I'm the President of the United States. Get out of here." His words stung, but Malcolm didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He just turned around and walked out, leaving Rick to seethe in front of the customers. At that moment, Malcolm knew exactly what was coming. What neither of them knew, however, was that their encounter had been captured on a young customer's phone. The video would go viral. By the evening, the footage of Rick shouting at Malcolm was trending across social media. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, people everywhere were shocked by the racism displayed in such a public setting. The hashtags, Black Store Owner, Racist Manager Exposed, and Carter & Co. spread like wildfire. Millions of people watched in disbelief, as the manager of the store, not knowing who Malcolm truly was, had treated him with disdain and disrespect. The comments poured in from all corners of the internet. "How dare he treat a customer this way?" one person wrote. "I can't believe he's doing this to the owner," another added. "This is so messed up." Malcolm, however, said nothing. He didn't post a single word about the incident online. Instead, he plotted his next move carefully, with a calmness that was almost chilling. The next morning, Rick showed up for his shift, walking through the front doors of the store with his usual swagger. He didn't know that the video had already gone viral, didn't care to check the news or social media. He had always been cocky, always sure of his own position. He expected another normal day at work, thinking his earlier confrontation with Malcolm was just a fluke. But at 10:15 a.m., the front doors swung open once again, and this time, Malcolm walked in. He was dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, a far cry from his casual hoodie from the day before. Behind him trailed 2 lawyers and a few members of the press. Rick blinked, taken aback by the sudden change in demeanor. He tried to laugh it off, but it was clear he was rattled. "What now?" "Didn't I already tell you to get out?" Rick sneered. But this time, Malcolm didn't hesitate. He calmly walked up to Rick, handed him a manila folder, and said, "This is the ownership contract for Carter and Cobra Home Supplies, signed and filed. I'm the sole owner of this business, and you, Rick Daniels, are fired." Rick's face went pale. He stammered, his mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. You're kidding, right? This is a joke." Malcolm stood tall, unflinching. "It's not a joke. It's justice," he said, turning to face the cameras that were rolling. The entire scene, the man in a suit, the fired manager, the legal papers. It was a power move that resonated with viewers far beyond the walls of that store. The viral video exploded online. TV stations picked up the story, and local news outlets ran with it. People were in awe of Malcolm's professionalism, his calm response in the face of clear provocation. But it wasn't just Malcolm's actions that caught attention. It was Rick's swift and public downfall. Rick, the manager who had shouted at a black man simply trying to check out his own store, became a symbol of unchecked prejudice. His social media pages were bombarded with angry comments, his reputation destroyed almost overnight. Former employers distanced themselves, and offers from potential companies were rescinded. In the public eye, Rick had become known as the racist manager, who had tried to throw out the very man who owned the business. For Malcolm, though, the fight didn't end with Rick's firing. Over the next few days, employees began coming forward, with their own stories of mistreatment under Rick's management. One worker, a young woman named Tasha, explained how Rick had made fun of her accent. Another employee described how Rick had flat out refused to promote him, despite his qualifications. It became clear that Rick's prejudices weren't limited to just one incident. They were part of a larger pattern of disrespect and discriminatory behavior. In response, Malcolm took immediate action. He met with every single employee, one-on-one, listening to their experiences and taking detailed notes. It didn't take long for him to make changes. Tasha, the woman Rick had so cruelly ignored, was promoted to the role of store manager, becoming the first black woman to hold the position at that particular location. Malcolm raised wages across the board for the employees, knowing that they had been underpaid and undervalued for far too long. He also implemented mandatory sensitivity training for all staff, ensuring that something like what happened with Rick could never happen again. But Malcolm didn't stop there. His vision for empowerment extended far beyond just his store. He knew that his success wasn't just about him. It was about opening doors for others. And so, he created Own It, a program designed to help black entrepreneurs buy and manage retail businesses. He partnered with local banks to offer favorable loans, provided mentorship to budding business owners, and used his own capital to help others achieve success. Malcolm's goal was clear. If you've ever been told you don't belong, I want to help you own that place. Malcolm's initiative took off, and soon, young entrepreneurs from underserved communities started applying to his program. For many, Malcolm became a hero, someone who not only rose above adversity, but who actively worked to lift others as well. His story resonated deeply with people all over the country, inspiring a new generation of black business owners to chase their dreams. 6 months later, Malcolm walked back into the same store. The place had undergone a complete transformation: fresh paint, better service, and a diverse group of customers coming and going, each one treated with respect. As he made his way to the counter, a customer, noticing him, stopped and smiled. "Hey, aren't you the guy from that video, the one who got kicked out?" Malcolm laughed. "Yeah, that's me, the one who owns the store now." The customer shook their head, clearly impressed. "Man, you're a legend." That night, Malcolm went live on Instagram, speaking to his followers in a tone that was equal parts calm and powerful. Sometimes you get judged by how you look before they ever ask who you are, but you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes, justice wears a suit and walks in quietly the next day. The message resonated deeply with his audience. The video reaching over 200,000 viewers. The comments flooded in. "You handled that like a king. This is what black excellence looks like. They tried to kick you out, and you bought the building." And so, as Malcolm Carter's story spread, one thing became undeniably clear. When you're told you don't belong, the best response isn't always to fight fire with fire. Sometimes all you need to do is walk back in and own the place. Malcolm Carter wasn't the kind of person who sought the spotlight. He didn't need to boast about his success. His reputation wasn't built on flashy displays of wealth or boasting about his accomplishments online. Instead, he believed in the power of hard work, the importance of quiet growth, and the value of giving back to the community that had supported him through the years. By 38, Malcolm had already achieved what many would consider the pinnacle of success. He had built a modest but profitable chain of stores spread across the state, each one a testament to his tenacity and vision. But despite his accomplishments, he remained humble, believing that real power came not from being seen, but from what was accomplished behind the scenes. His latest business venture, Carter & Carber Home Supplies, was his most recent investment. He had purchased it just 2 weeks earlier with plans to improve it, turning it into a place that was both successful and a source of pride for the local community. This particular store had potential, and Malcolm had already started making changes. But there was one thing he hadn't done yet. He had never properly introduced himself to the staff. Malcolm had no intention of making a grand entrance. He didn't want to show up in a suit or make a scene. He preferred a more personal touch, an introduction that felt real, grounded, and not surrounded by fanfare or unnecessary attention. So, one crisp morning, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, Malcolm decided to walk into the store, blending in like any other regular customer. He wasn't there to make waves or announce his ownership to anyone right away. He simply wanted to observe, see how the store operated, and get a feel for what needed improvement. It was just a regular visit, at least that's what it seemed like, but as soon as he stepped through the doors, he could tell something was off. The store felt tense, a bit too quiet, like there was an unspoken energy in the air. It wasn't anything he could immediately put his finger on, but something didn't sit right with him. As Malcolm made his way through the aisles, quietly observing the layout, the shelves, and the customer service, he noticed the store manager, Rick Daniels, glancing at him from the back office. Rick's expression was cold, almost judgmental, and it felt strange to Malcolm, who had always prided himself on being approachable and easygoing. Rick didn't bother to approach him, didn't greet him as he would any other customer, even though Malcolm's presence was obvious. Instead, he seemed to just watch him, sizing him up from afar. It wasn't until Malcolm had been in the store for a few minutes that Rick finally made his move. With a stern look on his face, Rick walked up to him, his arms crossed. "What do you think you're doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. Malcolm, still calm and composed, simply replied, "I'm just checking out the store." But Rick wasn't satisfied with that answer. His face contorted into a sneer as he looked Malcolm up and down. "This isn't a hangout spot for people like you," Rick spat, his tone now laced with irritation. "Customers only. You need to leave before I call the cops." For a moment, Malcolm stood there, stunned. He hadn't expected this kind of treatment, especially not from someone who worked for him. He had expected a polite greeting, a friendly exchange, but what he got instead was condescension and hostility. Rick's attitude was all wrong, and Malcolm could feel his blood start to simmer. But he didn't respond with anger. Instead, he raised an eyebrow and replied, "What if I told you I own this place?" Rick laughed mockingly, dismissing the statement outright. "Yeah, and I'm the President of the United States," Rick scoffed, as if Malcolm's claim was preposterous. "Get out now before I make a scene." Malcolm could feel the tension building in the room, the eyes of a few employees and customers now turning toward him. It was clear that this wasn't just about a simple misunderstanding. Rick wasn't just acting rude. He was acting aggressively, as though Malcolm, a well-dressed black man, didn't belong in a store like this. The way he was being treated didn't sit right with Malcolm, but he didn't respond in kind. He didn't get angry. He didn't escalate the situation. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked out of the store, leaving Rick behind to stew in his own frustration. He knew that this wouldn't be the last time Rick would see him, but it would be the last time Rick would treat him, or anyone else, this way. What Malcolm didn't know, however, was that the entire exchange had been captured on video by a young customer who had been in the store at the time. By the time evening rolled around, the video had gone viral, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Hashtags like Black Store Owner and Racist Manager Exposed began trending, and the video quickly garnered millions of views. People were outraged at the way Malcolm had been treated. The comments flooded in, many expressing disbelief that a manager could be so disrespectful to a customer, let alone someone who was clearly a well-dressed professional. As the video gained more traction, people began to demand justice. "How could someone treat another human being like that?" one commenter asked. "This is outrageous. That manager needs to be fired," another wrote. Meanwhile, Malcolm remained silent. He didn't say a word on social media, didn't engage in the growing online debate. Instead, he was already planning his next move. He didn't want to just make a public statement. He wanted to make sure that Rick's behavior wouldn't go unchecked, and he wanted to handle things on his terms. The next morning, when Rick walked into the store, he did so with his usual cocky attitude, completely unaware of the storm that had been brewing online. He hadn't seen the viral video, hadn't checked his social media accounts, and hadn't thought about the consequences of his actions. But as he walked into the store that day, he was about to learn the hard way that his attitude would no longer be tolerated. At precisely 10:15 a.m., the front door opened again. This time, however, Malcolm wasn't dressed in a hoodie and jeans. He walked in wearing a sharp navy blue suit, exuding confidence and control. Behind him were two lawyers and a few members of the press. Rick froze when he saw them. His confidence from the day before evaporated in an instant, and he could feel his stomach drop. "What now?" Rick sneered, his voice filled with sarcasm, but his face showed a flicker of nervousness. Without missing a beat, Malcolm handed him a folder. "This is the ownership contract for Carter & Cober Home Supplies," Malcolm said, his voice steady and unwavering. "I'm the sole owner of this business, and you, Rick Daniels, are fired." The color drained from Rick's face, his mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He stammered, struggling to comprehend what was happening. This is a joke, right?" Rick finally managed to say. "This isn't a joke," Malcolm responded, turning to the cameras. "This is justice." In the blink of an eye, Rick's career came to an end. His reputation was destroyed, and the video of his disgraceful behavior was everywhere. The public backlash was swift and unforgiving. His social media pages were flooded with hateful comments, and offers from potential employers evaporated. He was quickly branded as the racist manager who kicked out the black business owner, and his career was effectively over. Meanwhile, Malcolm became a symbol of strength, professionalism, and quiet justice. His calm demeanor, coupled with his commitment to justice, won him respect and admiration from all over the country. But Malcolm's victory didn't end there. He knew that his success wasn't just about him. It was about making a difference in the lives of others. He took steps to ensure that the employees who had been under Rick's management were treated fairly. He listened to their stories, took action to promote those who deserved it, and raised wages across the board. He also implemented sensitivity, training for all of the staff to ensure that such an incident would never happen again. And Malcolm didn't stop with just his own store. He created a new initiative, Own It, designed to help black entrepreneurs buy and manage retail stores. With his own capital and partnerships with banks, Malcolm began offering mentorship and financial support to aspiring black business owners. His goal was simple: if you've ever been told you don't belong, I want to help you own that place. Malcolm's initiative took off. Soon, young black entrepreneurs from underserved communities began applying, eager to follow in his footsteps and create their own success. For many, Malcolm became not just a businessman, but a hero, a real-life example of perseverance, excellence, and the power of community. 6 months later, Malcolm returned to the same store. The transformation was remarkable. The store had been completely overhauled, new paint, better customer service, and a diverse group of customers now coming and going, all treated with respect. As he walked up to the counter, a customer stopped him and asked, "Aren't you the guy from that video, the one who got kicked out?" Malcolm smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Yeah, that's me, the one who owns the store now." The customer grinned. Man, you're a legend. That evening, Malcolm went live on Instagram to share a simple but powerful message. Sometimes you get judged by how you look before they ever ask who you are. But you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes, justice wears a suit and walks in quietly the next day. The message resonated deeply with his audience, and soon the live video had over 200,000 views. The comments poured in. You handled that like a king. This is what black excellence looks like. They tried to kick you out and you bought the building. In the end, Malcolm Carter's story became more than just a tale of one man's triumph over racism. It was a message to the world. When you're told you don't belong, sometimes the best response is to simply walk back in and own the place. Rick Daniels had been with the store for 12 long years, steadily climbing the ranks. 6 months ago, he had finally been promoted to store manager, a position he viewed as an affirmation of his authority and power. Unfortunately, with that promotion came a sharp turn in his attitude. His newfound title went straight to his head, and he began treating both customers and employees with disdain. He was notorious for being rude to customers, belittling staff, and enforcing arbitrary rules about who looked like they belonged. He had a certain idea of who fit in at the store, and anyone who didn't match his narrow expectations was made to feel unwelcome. It was in this atmosphere of arrogance and intolerance that Malcolm Carter walked into the store, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans. His purpose was simple: to observe the store, get a feel for how things were run, and to see if there were areas that needed improvement. But Rick didn't see a customer entering the store. He saw a man who didn't fit the profile of a regular shopper, a well-dressed black man who in Rick's mind was likely loitering or causing trouble. Without a second thought, Rick assumed Malcolm was out of place. He didn't bother to ask questions or offer a friendly greeting. Instead, he strode up to Malcolm with an air of authority that only someone who felt entitled to treat others poorly could manage. "What are you doing here?" Rick demanded, his voice dripping with condescension. "This isn't a hangout spot. Customers only." Malcolm, calm and collected as ever, looked up and smiled politely. "Just checking the store out," replied, trying to keep the exchange light and non-confrontational, but Rick wasn't having it. His tone sharpened, and the mask of politeness slipped away entirely. "Look," he said, jabbing a finger toward the door. "I'm not going to say it again. Get out, or I'm calling the police." At this point, the tension in the air was palpable. People had begun to notice the interaction, and a few customers were now watching the scene unfold. Despite Rick's escalation, Malcolm didn't flinch. Instead, he raised an eyebrow and asked in the calmest voice, "And what if I told you I own this place?" Rick's response was a loud, dismissive laugh. He clearly didn't believe Malcolm, or he simply couldn't fathom the idea that someone like him could be the owner of a store in his domain. "Yeah, and I'm the President of the United States," Rick sneered. "Now get out." The arrogance in Rick's voice was unmistakable, but Malcolm didn't rise to the bait. He didn't argue, didn't make a scene. Instead, he simply turned around and left, quietly walking out the door. The entire confrontation had taken mere minutes, but its impact would reverberate long after. Malcolm didn't raise his voice, didn't try to prove Rick wrong in front of the customers. He simply chose to walk away. But what Rick didn't realize, and what Malcolm knew all too well, was that this moment wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. A teenage customer, who had been quietly shopping in the store, stood frozen as the confrontation unfolded before her eyes. She had been standing near the back aisle, examining some home supplies, when the tension in the air became thick and unbearable. She watched, confused at first, as a well-dressed black man was verbally accosted by the store manager. She could hardly believe what was happening. This wasn't some random altercation or a misunderstanding. This was racism at its most blatant, a scenario that would have been hard to stomach even in the quietest of settings. But what made it worse was the arrogance with which Rick Daniels had treated Malcolm, assuming he didn't belong, assuming he was a threat, and assuming he had no right to be there. When the manager's words echoed through the store, "Get out before I call the cops," she saw the indignity in Malcolm's eyes, the shock on his face. But what struck her even more was how he handled it. With dignity, with composure, and with an unshakable calm. He didn't respond with aggression. He didn't yell back. He didn't try to match Rick's hostility. He simply left, quietly, as if the situation didn't deserve any more of his energy. The teenage girl, holding her phone in her hand, instinctively began recording. She knew the moment she witnessed something that needed to be seen, something that would echo long after it had happened. She had a front-row seat to an unfolding moment that could not be ignored. She didn't know who Malcolm was at the time, or that he was the owner of the store. All she knew was that a man had just been humiliated for no reason other than his appearance, and that needed to be exposed. By the time Malcolm had left the store, her video was already on TikTok. She posted it, not thinking much of it at first, but with the hope that people would see what she had seen and speak out about it. Within minutes, the video began to gain traction. The hashtags were added. Black store owner. Racist manager exposed. Carter & Co. The video started popping up on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The viral machine had taken hold. People were shocked. No, they were outraged. They couldn't believe what they had just watched. In an era where racism had been openly discussed, but still existed in ugly corners of the world, this kind of blatant disrespect was far from new. But what made this video so powerful was the juxtaposition. The calm, collected demeanor of a man who had every right to be angry but chose restraint, versus the outright aggression of a man who felt entitled to treat someone like less than nothing, simply because of their skin color. The video was being shared by everyone, celebrities, activists, people who had lived through similar experiences, and those who had simply been horrified by the blatant racism on display. By the time the clock hit midnight, the video had racked up over 2 million views. It was everywhere. News outlets began reporting the story, and social media was ablaze with comments. The video became a focal point for a larger conversation about racism, inequality, and the silent struggles many Black Americans face on a daily basis. Calls for justice were flooding in. People wanted answers. They wanted to know who Rick Daniels was. They wanted to know what would happen to the manager, and they wanted to know how something like this could still happen in 2025. The public reaction was swift and intense. Outrage, sorrow, and disbelief poured out from every corner of the internet. People began demanding that action be taken. Rick needed to be fired, and the business itself needed to be held accountable for allowing such behavior to go unchecked. There were calls for boycotts of Carter & Co. home supplies, petitions being signed, and local activists urging people to take action. The message was clear. This kind of behavior had no place in society, especially in a community where diversity was meant to be celebrated, not ridiculed. But amidst the swell of online outrage, Malcolm Carter remained silent. Not a single post, not a word of condemnation on social media. He was not one to respond to online drama or to let social media dictate his next move. While the internet raged, he stayed focused, calm, and strategic. Malcolm wasn't interested in fighting this battle in the court of public opinion. He wasn't going to get caught up in the spectacle. As much as the internet demanded justice, Malcolm knew there was a far more powerful way to deliver it. He was already planning his next steps. The video had sparked a firestorm, but it was only the beginning of what Malcolm had in mind. He wasn't looking for revenge, and he wasn't interested in playing into the narrative of a public spectacle. What he wanted was change, real, lasting change. He understood the importance of what had just happened. The video had exposed a deep-rooted issue, the assumption that Black people didn't belong in spaces they had every right to be in. But Malcolm wasn't interested in just winning a battle on social media. He was focused on winning the war for equality and opportunity. The internet had given him a powerful platform, but that platform could be fleeting. He knew that if he wanted to ensure that this moment wasn't just another viral video that faded into obscurity, he needed to make sure his actions spoke louder than any post ever could. The next morning, Malcolm showed up at Carter & Co. home. Supplies, but this time it wasn't as a passive observer. This time he was on a mission, and his presence was not only known, but it was intentional. As he walked into the store, dressed in a navy blue suit and flanked by 2 of his lawyers, The entire atmosphere shifted. The air felt charged, the weight of his quiet confidence carrying a sense of purpose that immediately commanded attention. Rick, still oblivious to the viral storm that had taken place overnight, was at the front of the store, pretending like everything was normal. The moment he laid eyes on Malcolm, there was a flicker of recognition, but it was too late. Malcolm approached him and without a word handed him a folder. The words inside that folder were simple, but they carried the weight of justice. A signed contract, the proof that Malcolm Carter was, in fact, the sole owner of Carter & Cobra's Home Supplies. Rick's face drained of color as he read the document, his arrogant stance crumbling into disbelief. You're the owner?" Rick stammered, unable to process what was happening. Malcolm didn't answer with words. Instead, he turned to the cameras that had been strategically placed in the store. "It's not a joke," Malcolm said, his voice steady and unshaken. "It's justice." The cameras flashed, capturing every moment as Rick's fate was sealed. Within hours, the news was reporting the story, and Malcolm's calm, powerful response to racism was being shared across every platform. But while the internet buzzed with the news, it wasn't just about Rick's public downfall. The real story was Malcolm's quiet revolution. He had taken control of the situation, not through anger or social media drama, but through calculated action. He had turned a viral incident into a message of empowerment, of strength, and of ownership. In a world where people often feel powerless in the face of systemic injustice, Malcolm had shown that sometimes the most powerful response is the one that doesn't involve yelling, fighting, or playing into the noise. It's the one where you calmly walk into the room and take ownership of the store, of the narrative, and of your own destiny. That night, Malcolm's story was told to millions. But for him, it wasn't about the spotlight or the viral video. It was about using the platform to bring about real change. In the coming weeks, Rick Daniels found himself at the center of a public scandal. His reputation was shattered beyond repair. No apology, no matter how insincere, could undo the damage he had caused. His social media accounts were flooded with calls for accountability, and companies that had previously shown interest in hiring him quickly distanced themselves. His career was effectively over. Meanwhile, Malcolm turned the attention he had garnered into something bigger than a viral moment. He didn't just fire Rick, he set a new course for the store and for others who had faced similar struggles. His initiative, Own It, aimed to help Black entrepreneurs gain access to the resources and support they needed to become business owners themselves. By partnering with banks and offering mentorship, Malcolm was creating an ecosystem of Black business owners who would not only thrive, but would also help reshape the narrative around who belonged in these spaces. As for the teenage customer who had recorded the video, she became an unexpected hero in the eyes of many. Her decision to film the incident had sparked a movement, and she became part of a larger conversation about the power of social media in holding people accountable. Malcolm knew that the battle wasn't over, but he had won a crucial victory. Through calm, strategic action, he had shown the world that sometimes the most powerful way to fight back against injustice is with grace, dignity, and a firm commitment to making lasting change. The sun had barely risen, and Rick Daniels walked into Carter & Co. Home Supplies with the same indifferent swagger he always carried. His confidence was unshakable, despite the chaos the previous day had stirred in the store. The viral video, the one where he had humiliated a Black man, assuming he didn't belong, hadn't reached him yet. Rick was too busy, too consumed by his own arrogance to check his social media or keep up with what was going on outside of his own narrow world. He had been promoted to store manager just 6 months ago, and in his mind, that meant he had the authority to dictate who could and couldn't be there. In his world, Malcolm Carter was just another guy who didn't fit in. Rick didn't care about the storm he had caused. He thought he was untouchable. As the clock ticked past 10:15 a.m., the front door of the store swung open, and Rick didn't even look up at first. He was already in the back room going through inventory, muttering to himself about how things never ran smoothly. But then, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Slow, deliberate. He turned to see a figure in a sharp navy blue suit walking toward him. It wasn't just the suit that grabbed Rick's attention. It was the presence of two serious-looking lawyers following closely behind, each holding a briefcase. The sight of the lawyers didn't faze him. It was the camera crews that caused Rick's stomach to churn. He blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. "You again?" Rick scoffed, trying to mask the flicker of panic that rose in his chest. "What now?" Malcolm Carter didn't speak right away. He simply walked up to Rick, his calm demeanor unshaken by the tension in the room. There was no anger in his eyes, no sense of confrontation in his body language. He was the picture of control. Without saying a word, he handed Rick a thick folder. The kind of folder that felt heavier than it looked. Rick eyed it with suspicion, confused by the sudden and dramatic shift in the atmosphere. "What's this?" Rick asked, his voice sharper than he intended. He had a sinking feeling in his gut but couldn't quite put his finger on why. "This," Malcolm said evenly, "is the ownership contract for Carter & Kober Home Supplies. Signed, sealed, and filed. I'm the sole owner of this business." Rick's face went pale. He tried to laugh it off. He thought maybe this was some elaborate joke or prank. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "This has to be a joke," he said, chuckling nervously. "You're not serious." Malcolm didn't smile. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he turned toward the cameras, which had been recording every moment. The whole store had gone silent, as everyone watched. "It's not a joke," Malcolm replied calmly, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience, of quiet power, and of undeniable truth. "It's justice." Rick's mind raced, his thoughts a blur of confusion, frustration, and anger. The walls seemed to close in on him. He couldn't process the words that had just been spoken. The reality of the situation was crashing down around him, and for the first time in his career, Rick felt utterly powerless. He had been so sure of himself the day before, so certain that nothing would come of his actions. He had humiliated Malcolm in front of the customers, shouted at him, belittled him, all because of his own prejudices. But now, as the realization set in, he understood that he had just met the man who had the power to change everything. His career, his reputation, all of it hung in the balance, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His eyes flicked back to the folder, as if hoping it would somehow change or disappear. But the words were clear. This was not a game. This was not something he could talk his way out of. He tried to regain his composure, but his voice wavered as he stammered, "This can't be real. You can't just do this. You're—" Malcolm cut him off. "You're fired, Rick." There was no anger in his voice, just a quiet certainty. "You've disrespected customers. You've disrespected staff. And now you've disrespected me. I'm done." Rick didn't have time to process this new wave of humiliation. He was shaking now, his mind spinning with panic and disbelief. "You can't do this. You can't—" His voice cracked, but the words were useless. The room, once filled with his dominance and control, now seemed to shrink around him, suffocating him in his own failure. Malcolm stood there watching him with steady eyes. "I can and I did," he said, his words simple but final. "You don't get to treat people like that. Not here. Not in my store." As the cameras continued to capture every second, Rick felt his world crumble. The viral video that had been shared the night before had done more damage than he could have ever imagined. The anger and outrage that had fueled the internet now had real-world consequences. He was a public figure now, a pariah. His reputation was tarnished beyond repair, and the quiet man in front of him had become the symbol of accountability, of power, of justice. Malcolm didn't need to raise his voice to make Rick understand the magnitude of what was happening. Every word, every move, every decision had been calculated, and now the consequences were coming to collect. Rick's knees felt weak, and he stumbled back trying to grasp onto something, anything to hold him up. But there was nothing. No excuse. No reason. No way out. The door he had so arrogantly closed on Malcolm the day before had now been opened wide, and he was trapped in the consequences of his own actions. The cameras rolled, capturing the silence. That followed, the moment of reckoning. It was too late for apologies, too late for excuses. Rick Daniels had already made his choice, and now he had to live with it. The room was still. The employees, who had been watching from the sidelines, exchanged glances. They knew what had been happening for years. They had witnessed the mistreatment, the discrimination, the small slights that built up over time. But now they were watching justice unfold, and it was clear that this was only the beginning. This wasn't just about one racist manager losing his job. This was about something larger, about reclaiming dignity, about standing up for what was right, and about showing that no one, no matter how powerful or privileged, was above accountability. Rick Daniels was fired, but his downfall was far from the end of this story. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Carter & Kober Home Supplies. It was the start of a culture shift, one where people would be treated with respect, where diversity would be embraced, and where those who thought they could mistreat others without consequences would be held accountable. Malcolm Carter's quiet revolution had just begun. The video of Malcolm Carter's return to Carter & Kober Home Supplies went viral in a way no one could have predicted, sending shockwaves through social media and traditional media alike. As the footage spread across platforms like TikTok and Twitter, it quickly gained millions of views, sparking outrage and support from all corners of the internet. People from across the world were in awe of Malcolm's composed demeanor and his calculated professional handling of the situation. While the viral video painted him as calm, dignified, and powerful, it also exposed the ugly truth about Rick Daniels and his racism. Malcolm, rather than seeking public revenge, had executed a power move that was as quiet as it was effective, and it resonated with the public in a way that made them rally behind him. TV channels, both local and national, immediately picked up the story, airing it on primetime news, where Malcolm became the face of justice, a symbol of quiet strength in the face of adversity. The more the story circulated, the more people praised Malcolm's ability to remain poised despite being humiliated. His refusal to lash out or engage in a public fight was lauded, and his calculated return to the store was seen as a masterstroke of professionalism. In sharp contrast, Rick Daniels found himself the subject of intense scrutiny. He became infamous overnight, his name synonymous with the term racist manager, after being exposed for kicking out a black man who, as it turned out, was his own boss. The backlash against Rick was swift and unforgiving. His Facebook, LinkedIn, and other social media profiles were flooded with hateful messages and calls for accountability, with people from all over the world expressing their outrage at his behavior. What made matters worse for Rick was that his apology, when it finally came, was as shallow as it was insincere. In a half-hearted attempt to salvage some dignity, Rick issued a public statement, but it was too late. The damage had been done. No one was buying his apology. The video had already cemented his reputation as the bigoted manager who had tried to belittle the very person he should have respected. The backlash didn't stop online. It bled into his professional life as well. Companies that had once considered working with Rick or offering him new opportunities immediately backed away, refusing to associate with someone who had so publicly displayed his ignorance and disrespect. Rick's career, which he had once assumed was on an upward trajectory, was now on an irreversible downward spiral. Employers and colleagues alike distanced themselves, unwilling to take the risk of associating with him after the storm he had brought upon himself. In the days that followed, the quiet power of Malcolm's actions continued to resonate. People spoke about his leadership, about how he handled the situation with dignity and poise. Meanwhile, Rick was forced to confront the stark reality of his actions. He was no longer just a disgraced manager. He had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of racism and entitlement. The fallout was so severe that Rick's ability to ever recover seemed impossible. The story of Malcolm's quiet triumph, juxtaposed against Rick's public humiliation, served as a powerful reminder that sometimes justice doesn't need to be loud or violent. It just needs to be patient, calculated, and unwavering. Malcolm had done what so many had wanted to do, but lacked the courage to attempt. He had stood up for himself, stood up for what was right, and he had done it in a way that left no room for doubt. Rick, on the other hand, had thought he could get away with his prejudice, thinking that his position of power and privilege would protect him from accountability. But Malcolm's actions showed him and the world that no one is above being held accountable, And when people are pushed too far, they will fight back, not with anger, but with resolve. And so, as the days went on, it became clear. While Rick Daniels might have been fired from his job, the real story was just beginning. The truth that had been revealed would change everything, and the narrative that had once been dominated by racism and ignorance was now being rewritten by Malcolm Carter and his powerful demonstration of grace and justice. The fallout from that one moment, that one video, would ripple out far beyond the walls of Carter & Kober Home Supplies, shaping the conversation about race, power, and accountability for years to come. But for Rick, there was no coming back. The doors that once seemed wide open to him slammed shut, one after the other, until there was no escape from the consequences of his actions. Malcolm had won not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. He had shown the world that sometimes the best way to handle ignorance and hate is with quiet strength. And that's exactly what Malcolm did. After Rick was fired, the atmosphere at Carter & Kober's Home Supplies shifted. Employees who had long endured the oppressive environment Rick had fostered felt a sense of relief, but also a newfound responsibility to speak out about the abuse they had faced under his management. The stories began to surface, each one revealing a deeper layer of the toxic culture that had been allowed to fester for years. One employee, a young woman with a thick accent, shared how Rick would mock her when she spoke to customers. She recalled the times he'd belittle her, calling her accent unprofessional and telling her to speak properly if she wanted to be taken seriously. Another employee spoke up about how Rick had refused to promote him despite his years of experience and the fact that he had trained several new hires. Despite working hard and demonstrating his leadership abilities, Rick's blatant disregard for his efforts left him feeling unseen and unappreciated. Yet perhaps the most shocking testimony came from an employee who recounted how Rick had once said, "We don't need any ghetto customers here," an unapologetic remark that exposed the deep-seated racism and classism that had guided his decisions. It became clear to everyone that Rick's biases had not only affected his relationship with the staff, but had also shaped the store's culture, from the way customers were treated to the opportunities given, or more often withheld, from certain employees. Malcolm, however, did not react with anger or frustration. Instead, he chose to listen. He sat with each employee one by one, giving them the space to express their experiences and their concerns. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He simply listened. And as he listened, he took notes, carefully considering each piece of feedback and what it meant for the future of the store and its culture. He knew that for real change to happen, he would need to take action. But he also understood that those who had been affected the most had valuable insights that could guide his decisions. Malcolm's calm and measured approach was in stark contrast to the chaotic and discriminatory management style that had defined Rick's reign. Where Rick had been arrogant and dismissive, Malcolm was open and humble, recognizing that leadership wasn't about asserting power, but about serving others. One of the most significant changes Malcolm made was promoting Tasha, a hard-working assistant manager, to take over as the new store manager. Tasha had been with the company for several years, proving herself time and again through her dedication and work ethic. She had long been passed over for promotions, despite her qualifications, but under Malcolm's leadership, things changed. He saw her potential and made the decision to promote her to a position of power, making her the first Black woman to hold the role in that location. This promotion was more than just a job change for Tasha. It was a statement. It was a recognition of her worth, her abilities, and her tireless contributions to the company. It was also a reflection of Malcolm's commitment to diversity and inclusion, ensuring that leadership at all levels of the company was reflective of the community it served. But Malcolm didn't stop at just promoting Tasha. He also took steps to ensure that the entire staff felt valued and respected. He raised wages across the board, understanding that fair compensation was an essential part of creating a positive work environment. He recognized the financial struggles that many of his employees faced and knew that by raising wages, he could help alleviate some of the burdens they carried. It wasn't just about money. It was about showing his employees that they mattered and that their hard work was appreciated. In addition to the wage increase, Malcolm implemented sensitivity training for all staff. He wanted to ensure that the toxic culture of racism and prejudice that had been perpetuated under Rick's management would not take root again. The training wasn't just a one-time seminar. It was an ongoing process aimed at fostering understanding, empathy, and inclusivity. Malcolm understood that true change required education and reflection, and he was committed to providing the tools necessary for his employees to grow and become more aware of their biases, both unconscious and conscious. The changes Malcolm made weren't just about correcting the wrongs of the past, they were about setting a new standard for the future. His leadership style was rooted in fairness, respect, and a genuine desire to create a better workplace for everyone, regardless of their background. As the weeks went by, the culture of Carter & Cumber Home Supplies began to shift. Employees started to feel more valued, more heard, and more invested in the success of the company. Tasha, as the new manager, brought a fresh perspective to the store, focusing on building a positive, supportive environment where everyone had the opportunity to succeed. She worked alongside Malcolm to implement changes that improved the day-to-day experience for both employees and customers alike. Slowly but surely, the store's reputation transformed from a place of division and hostility to one of unity and opportunity. Malcolm's actions set a powerful example for other business owners and managers to follow. His willingness to listen, to make difficult decisions, and to prioritize the well-being of his employees showed that it was possible to create a thriving business without sacrificing integrity or values. His commitment to fairness and justice resonated deeply with his employees, who felt a renewed sense of purpose and pride in their work. And as for Rick, his departure from the company became a distant memory, overshadowed by the positive changes Malcolm had made and the new direction he had set for the business. The legacy of Rick's discriminatory management style was replaced with a legacy of empowerment, growth, and inclusivity. Malcolm Carter had not only turned around a struggling business, but had also set a new standard for what it meant to lead with integrity and compassion. Malcolm Carter's success with Carter & Cumber Home Supplies had only been the beginning of his journey, a mere stepping stone toward something much larger. While his victory over the racist manager, Rick Daniels, had garnered national attention and earned him admiration from all corners of the world, Malcolm wasn't content to rest on his laurels. He saw a much deeper issue at play, one that transcended just his own personal success. He understood that the barriers to success were not just individual but systemic, particularly for Black entrepreneurs who were often denied the opportunities to build wealth, own businesses, or even be taken seriously in the corporate world. So, instead of sitting back, celebrating his victory, or simply enjoying his growing wealth, Malcolm decided to make a lasting impact, one that would extend far beyond the walls of his own stores. He launched the Own It initiative, a groundbreaking program designed to help Black entrepreneurs purchase and manage retail stores. It wasn't just a business model, it was a revolution in the making. The goal was simple but profound: empower people who had been historically excluded from financial opportunities to take control of their futures, to build businesses of their own, and to show the world that they belonged in every corner of commerce. Malcolm wasn't content with just being a successful business owner. He wanted to be a catalyst for change, a mentor, and a beacon of hope for anyone who had been told they didn't belong in a certain space, anyone who had been denied the chance to prove themselves. Malcolm's Own It program became his mission, and it was a mission he poured his heart and soul into. He knew that financial barriers were one of the biggest hurdles for aspiring entrepreneurs in underserved communities, so he partnered with local banks to create a financing program specifically tailored for Black entrepreneurs, offering favorable loan terms and advice on how to manage the capital. But that was just the start. Malcolm didn't want to just offer financial assistance. He wanted to ensure that the entrepreneurs who entered the program would succeed long-term. To that end, he personally took on the role of mentor, offering guidance, advice, and leadership, training to all those who applied. He knew firsthand the challenges that came with managing a business, from navigating complicated supplier relationships to dealing with the day-to-day grind of operations, so he wanted to pass on the wisdom he had gained through years of hard work and perseverance. But perhaps the most inspiring part of Malcolm's initiative was the way he used his own capital to invest in the dreams of others. He wasn't just an advocate, he was a partner. He put his money where his mouth was, directly investing in the businesses of those who showed promise, those who had the vision but lacked the resources to bring it to fruition. He didn't just provide a helping hand, he helped lay the foundation for their success, taking risks and betting on people who were often overlooked by traditional investors. In doing so, Malcolm created a network of successful, thriving businesses, owned by Black entrepreneurs who had the tools and support they needed to build a lasting legacy. His initiative became a beacon of hope, and the ripple effect of his actions was felt throughout the community. Malcolm's story of success wasn't just about his own achievements. It was about showing others that success was possible for them, too. Word spread quickly, and soon young men and women from all over the country, particularly from underserved communities, began applying for the Own ET program. They saw Malcolm as someone who not only understood their struggles but had lived them, someone who had faced the same systemic barriers and had risen above them to create something extraordinary. Malcolm wasn't just a business owner, he was a symbol of what was possible when you refused to let society's limitations define you. For many of these applicants, Malcolm became a real-life hero, someone who had proven that no matter where you came from or what you looked like, you could achieve greatness if you were willing to work for it. The stories of success began to mount. One by one, aspiring entrepreneurs who had been given a chance through the Own IT program started to build their own businesses, opening retail stores in communities that had long been overlooked by mainstream investors. They sold everything from clothing to tech gadgets to home goods, but what they sold didn't matter as much as what they represented. They were proof that Black entrepreneurs could not only survive but thrive in spaces that had been closed to them for so long. As the program gained momentum, Malcolm's influence grew, and he became a respected leader in the world of entrepreneurship, sought after for interviews, panels, and speaking engagements. But even as his name became more recognized, he remained focused on his mission, on helping others achieve their dreams. Malcolm's work wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about making a tangible difference in the lives of people who had been told their dreams were out of reach. It was about leveling the playing field and ensuring that Black entrepreneurs had the resources, support, and opportunity to succeed. And for Malcolm, there was no greater reward than watching his mentees succeed. Knowing that he had played a part in helping them turn their dreams into reality, the success stories continued to pour in. And as each new business opened, the message became clear. When you empower people who have been marginalized, when you give them the tools and the opportunities they need, they will rise. Malcolm's legacy was no longer just about one man's success in building a retail empire. It was about changing the narrative, about showing the world that the next generation of Black entrepreneurs wasn't just going to take a seat at the table. They were going to own it. And so, through the Own It initiative, Malcolm Carter became more than just a business mogul. He became a movement, an inspiration to thousands of people who had been told they couldn't do it. He became the living proof that when you refuse to give up on yourself and others, when you take action to create opportunities, you can change the world. His story didn't just inspire others to succeed, it showed them how. 6 months after the viral incident that had sparked a nationwide conversation, Malcolm Carter returned to the same store where his life, and the lives of those around him, had dramatically changed. The store, once a place of tension and hostility, now stood as a shining example of transformation. The once dull walls had been painted with fresh, vibrant colors, giving the entire store a new energy. The aisles were neatly organized, and the shelves were fully stocked with products that customers loved. The service had improved too. Staff members were attentive, courteous, and eager to help. And most notably, the customer base had expanded, with people from all walks of life happily shopping, enjoying their experience, and spending money in a space that now felt welcoming and inclusive. As Malcolm walked through the store, taking in the new atmosphere, a sense of pride filled him. The changes weren't just cosmetic, they reflected the deeper cultural shift he had instilled within the business. This wasn't just a store anymore. It was a symbol of what could happen when you took control of your narrative, when you turned adversity into opportunity, and when you took the time to invest in people, not just products. As he made his way to the counter, a young man behind it looked up and froze for a moment, his eyes widening in recognition. He stepped closer, and with a bit of hesitation asked, "You're the guy from the video, right?" The one who got kicked out. Malcolm's lips curled into a smile, but there was no bitterness, no anger, just quiet pride. The one who owns the store now? Yeah, that's me, he replied. The young man's face lit up, and he laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. Man, you're a legend. Malcolm chuckled softly. He wasn't seeking praise or admiration. For him, the real reward wasn't the viral video or the recognition. It was the fact that this store, his store, had become something entirely new. A place that once represented exclusion and prejudice had now become a hub for the community. A place where people of all backgrounds felt welcomed and valued. In that moment, Malcolm realized that his journey had never been about proving people wrong or getting revenge. It had always been about building something greater than himself, something that could outlast him and change the world around him. And as the customer walked away, still in awe of the legend he had just met, Malcolm couldn't help but feel that the real victory wasn't in the headlines, the viral videos, or the success of the business. The true triumph was in the quiet, everyday moments, the smiles of the customers, the respect of his staff, and the knowledge that he had made a lasting impact on the community. That night, as the world continued to buzz with the viral story of Malcolm Carter's quiet victory, he took to Instagram to share a simple but powerful message with his followers. As the camera zoomed in on his calm expression, his voice resonated, with wisdom that transcended the situation. Sometimes you get judged by how you look before they ever ask who you are. But you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes, justice wears a suit and walks in quietly the next day. His words, delivered with the poise and humility that had defined his journey, struck a chord. Within hours, over 200,000 viewers tuned in to hear him speak, and the comments flooded in, each one filled with admiration and awe. You handled that like a king. This is what Black excellence looks like. They tried to kick you out, and you bought the building. It was clear. Malcolm Carter had become not just a business owner, but a symbol of resilience, grace, and power. As we wrap up this incredible story, remember this. Sometimes the most powerful responses to injustice don't come in the form of anger or revenge, but in quiet action, in the pursuit of excellence, and in building something that lasts. Malcolm didn't just fight for himself, he fought for a greater cause, a vision where anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong could see that they too could take ownership of their destiny. So, the next time someone tells you don't belong here, just remember Malcolm Carter, the man who didn't yell, didn't fight, and didn't argue. He just came back the next day and owned the place. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and join us for more incredible journeys of perseverance and triumph. And remember, no matter where you come from, you have the power to rewrite your story. Keep pushing, keep dreaming, and always believe that you belong.